Hi, you're on the Reddit Confessions channel. The moment she walked in holding his hand, the room stopped breathing. We had just passed the mashed potatoes around. My aunt was halfway through a joke about someone at her bridge club getting caught shoplifting rotisserie chicken. The kids were running back and forth between the hallway and the kitchen, shrieking over spilled root beer. And then she appeared. The door hadn't even fully closed behind her when her fingers slid out of his, as if she could feel it too, that something was wrong, that something wasn't computing. Her name came out of my mother's mouth like a reflex. Delaney? Not angry, not surprised. Just soft and confused, like hearing thunder on a clear day. The man next to her, tall, square-jawed, wearing that smug navy blue sport coat people buy when they want to look harmless, offered a wide grin. "Evening, everyone," he said, like this was a corporate dinner and he was about to give a presentation on sales performance. Nobody responded. She blinked, took a step inside, and scanned the room. Her eyes landed on the cake, the gifts, the photographs of our wedding still hanging beside the kitchen door. Then they met mine. She froze. It was just for a second, a crack in her composure, like her soul slipped and twisted an ankle. But I saw it. I saw it. Because that was the second she realized I wasn't sitting alone. Across from me sat someone she never expected to see again. Someone who had once called her sister. And she was laughing. Not nervously, not politely, but in that way people do when they are genuinely happy to be somewhere they weren't supposed to be. Delaney's mouth opened slightly, like she wanted to say something but forgot the alphabet. I took a sip of water. She dropped her purse. The man beside her, Carter, I would learn later, bent down to pick it up, and in that moment she was alone, truly alone, in a room that used to love her, in a place where her stories used to belong. And then my mom stood. "Why don't we sit down?" she said, tight-lipped. "We've waited long enough." That's when Delaney did the unthinkable. She turned around, as if to leave, but Carter stopped her. His hand on her elbow was gentle, too gentle. Like he knew what she was about to walk into and didn't want to be dragged into it. She whispered something. He looked confused. Everyone else just watched. That silence, it lasted maybe 4 seconds, but it felt like someone had put my heart in a jar and shaken it violently. And that's when I realized she hadn't come to dinner because she missed us. She came to win. She sat down stiffly, like every muscle in her body was on the edge of rebellion. Carter pulled the chair out for her, still smiling like he thought this was some kind of charming meet-the-ex dinner. The poor guy had no idea he was walking into a minefield with party balloons. My mom passed the bowl of green beans without a word. Clara, my cousin, kept her eyes glued to her plate like it had suddenly become the most fascinating thing in the world. And me? I sat still, fork in hand, pretending to be mid-thought when really my brain had detonated 10 different emotional grenades. Delaney kept glancing at the woman sitting beside me, Mara, the woman she hadn't seen in years, the woman she once confided in, the woman she once said she'd take a bullet for. And now Mara was here, sipping red wine and chatting with my uncle like she belonged. Because she did. I had invited her. And no, it wasn't revenge. It was something quieter, something worse. It was proof that Delaney wasn't the only one who could move on. But if I'm honest, I hadn't really moved on. Not in the way people do when they start going to spin class and updating their dating profiles. I was still broken in little ways. I still double-checked my phone for her name. I still heard her laugh when I walked past the bookstore where she once made a scene over a missing poetry book. But when I saw the way her jaw clenched, like she was trying to swallow disappointment, I felt something shift. Mara leaned toward me and said, just loud enough for Delaney to hear, "I forgot how good your mom's cooking is. No one does rosemary potatoes like her." Delaney looked away so fast, you'd think she saw a ghost. I wanted to feel triumphant, but instead, I felt hollow. Carter tried to start a conversation. "So, how do you all know Delaney?" My uncle chuckled. "She was married to my nephew." Carter blinked. "Oh, I thought you were—" "I'm her replacement," Mara cut in with a smile so casual it made Delaney freeze mid-chew. And that was when she dropped her fork. It clattered against the plate like a gunshot. Everyone jumped except Mara. Delaney's eyes welled up. She picked up the fork, tried to act like nothing happened, and muttered something about needing a napkin. But I saw it. I saw the flicker of realization in her eyes. She came here thinking she'd stolen the spotlight. She didn't expect to find it already burned out. What she did next? It wasn't anger, it was panic. Carter leaned toward Delaney, whispering something that made her shoulders stiffen like iron rods. I didn't need to hear the words to know what he asked. His eyes had been darting between Mara and me ever since she said replacement, and I could practically see the thoughts stacking up in his head. He wasn't stupid, just naive. And he'd walked right into a dinner where everyone else knew the ending of the movie except him. Delaney tried to recover, forced a laugh that didn't even reach her throat, and cleared her voice to change the subject. So, Mara, you still painting? It was a weak attempt. Mara knew it. I knew it. Even my 7-year-old niece, who was playing with butter knives at the end of the table, probably knew it. Mara wiped her mouth gently, set her napkin down, and smiled with that quiet grace she always carried. Sometimes. I stopped for a while after the wedding. The silence that followed was brutal. My mom's knife slipped and clinked against her plate. My cousin gasped just slightly. Anne Delaney, her face paled a full shade. Carter blinked. Wedding? Delaney didn't even look at him. Her fingers tightened around her wine glass like it might save her. Mara tilted her head, pretending not to notice. Oh, sorry. I mean their wedding. I didn't go. Thought it would have been too weird since we were all so close. Carter's head slowly turned toward Delaney, his smile flickering. Wait, so you two were married? And that was it. The moment the illusion cracked, Delaney opened her mouth, but no words came out. For someone who used to always have something clever to say, she suddenly looked like a tourist who'd realized too late she got on the wrong train. Her voice finally emerged, dry and defensive. I didn't think it was a big deal. Carter leaned back, processing. Not a big deal? You brought me to a dinner with your ex-husband and didn't think that was worth mentioning? My aunt coughed loudly, trying to reset the table vibe. Someone laughed nervously. But the tension was like wet cement. It wasn't going anywhere. I just sat there, numb, holding my fork like it might stop my hands from shaking. I wanted to disappear, and yet, some dark part of me wanted her to stew in this mess she created. She thought she'd walk in glowing, smug, the center of the story. But now she was shrinking, realizing she didn't own the room anymore. Carter looked at me, then Mara, then back at Delaney, and that's when he asked it. So, were you divorced before we started dating? Her silence was the answer. What happened next? Let's just say the night was far from over. For a moment, no one moved. The air felt heavier than anything I'd ever breathed, like the whole room was holding its breath in anticipation of what Carter would say next. His jaw was clenched, his hand resting just above his plate, knuckles white. Delaney tried to offer him a smile, the same manipulative half-smile she used to throw at me when she knew she was losing the argument, but still wanted to feel in control. But this time, it didn't work. Carter pushed back from the table. Everyone flinched at the sound of the chair legs scraping against the hardwood floor. Delaney's smile evaporated. Her lips parted like she wanted to stop him, but nothing came out. I don't think she expected him to make a scene. Not Carter, not Mr. Perfect Jacket guy. She clearly thought she'd upgraded. He stood there, not even looking at her, and turned toward my mother instead. I'm really sorry, he said quietly. I didn't know this was what it was. My mother gave a polite nod, her eyes darting quickly to me, and then to Delaney. And then Carter turned back to her. You told me you were separated. You never said he'd be here. He gestured toward me with a slight tilt of the head. You definitely didn't say you weren't divorced when we met. Or that you ghosted him and just left Delaney was shaking her head before he even finished. I didn't ghost him, Carter. We were done. I told you. You moved out, I muttered. You didn't say anything. It just slipped out. I hadn't meant to speak, but once I did, I couldn't stop. You left a note on the fridge. A note. After 9 years of marriage, the silence was suffocating. Delaney looked like she'd been slapped, not because I said anything untrue, but because someone else had finally heard it. The version of me she'd painted for Carter, the needy, emotionally unavailable husband, was cracking under the weight of what really happened. Carter didn't say another word. He just looked at her one last time, stepped away from the table, and walked toward the door. And for a second, God help her, Delaney stood up and followed. I swear to you, she actually believed he was going to walk out, and she'd trail behind him, and they'd leave together, whispering about how awkward it all was and how crazy it had been to show up. but he turned at the door and looked at her like she was a stranger. "You need to sit down," he said. "This mess belongs to you." And then he left. No slamming doors, no shouting. Just the quiet thud of truth hitting the floor. Delaney slowly turned back toward the table, pale, frozen, humiliated. Everyone was watching her. She didn't know whether to sit or disappear. She looked at me for help, for rescue, but I just stared back blankly, like I didn't even recognize her anymore, because maybe I didn't. But what she did next, that was the part none of us were ready for. Delaney didn't sit down right away. She stood there gripping the back of her chair like it might steady her, though it clearly wasn't working. Her face was locked in that uncomfortable in-between expression, half rage, half panic. The kind of look someone wears when they realize the script they brought doesn't match the scene they've walked into. She licked her lips like she was searching for the right words, then laughed once, short, sharp, and completely out of place. "Well," she finally said, "that was dramatic." My mother blinked, clearly stunned by the tone. Mara glanced at me, eyebrows raised just slightly, but she stayed silent. The rest of the table didn't move. We were all passengers now, watching her attempt to steer a car that had already veered off the cliff. Delaney pulled her chair out and sat down like it was a performance, folding her napkin delicately on her lap. "If anyone cares to hear my side—" "We don't," my uncle muttered before taking a sip of his wine. But she kept going, like she hadn't heard him. "Carter was never supposed to be permanent. I was figuring things out. I told him that. I told everyone that. But apparently when I try to move on, it's betrayal. And when he—" she jabbed a finger vaguely in my direction, "brings Mara to dinner, it's healing." My mom opened her mouth, probably to intervene, but I raised a hand slightly. I didn't want the interference, not this time. "You didn't try to move on," I said quietly. "You tried to erase. There's a difference." Her mouth snapped shut like a trap. "Oh, don't start with that wounded poet act again. You were impossible to talk to. You shut down. You stopped being the man I married." "I stopped being the man you married," I echoed, feeling the heat rising in my chest. "Because I lost my father and was trying to hold myself together without dragging you down with me." "But you weren't being dragged, Delaney. You were already walking away." She didn't respond, just stared at me, lips pressed tightly. I leaned back. "You left me for silence. And now you're angry it's not waiting for you." That got her. Her eyes flicked toward Mara again. Mara, who still hadn't said a word, who just sat there like a mirror Delaney couldn't stop glancing at but didn't want to see herself in. Then Delaney changed tactics. "You know what?" she said, turning to the table, her voice rising. "Maybe I am the villain here. Maybe I made mistakes, but I was tired of being invisible, tired of being the one holding everything together while he sulked in the dark. I wanted to breathe. You wanted an audience," Mara said softly. "Not air." It was quiet after that. Really quiet. Even the kids had gone silent somewhere down the hallway. Delaney pushed her chair back abruptly and stood again. "I don't need this," she muttered. "I thought maybe we could be adults, but apparently some of us still like to play victim." And then she turned to leave. But before she could even reach the door, my mother's voice broke the silence. Not loud, not angry, just firm. "Like, sit back down, Delaney. We're not done." Delaney froze. Her hand was already on the dining room doorframe, but my mother's voice made her stop mid-step, like someone had just called her full name in a church. The entire table looked at Mom now, who sat with her hands calmly folded in front of her, eyes focused on Delaney. Not with anger, not with judgment, but with something far worse. Disappointment. "You wanted to be seen," my mother said. "Congratulations, you're seen now. So sit down." For a second, I thought Delaney would keep walking, pride dragging her forward like a leash. But then something in her posture buckled. She turned slowly, wordlessly, and returned to her seat, her expression blank. I'd seen that look before. It was the one she wore the day she told me she wasn't happy anymore, while folding laundry like she was discussing the weather. My mom took a breath. "I don't usually get involved in your messes," she said evenly. "But you brought this one into my house during my dinner and dragged all of us into the fallout. So now you get to listen." No one interrupted. You don't interrupt my mother when she starts talking like that. "I watched the two of you build a marriage from nothing," she went on. "You struggled, you made sacrifices, and for a while, it looked like love. But then I watched you grow restless. You pulled away when things got hard. And instead of reaching out, You started rewriting the story in your head. You turned grief into blame. You turned distance into abandonment. And then you left. Delaney stared down at her lap, cheeks flushed. I never said a word, my mother continued, because I figured it was your marriage, not mine. But now you show up here, uninvited, with a man who didn't even know you were married, and expect us to play along like this is some awkward sitcom moment. You want closure? You don't get it from crashing dinners. I didn't come to... Delaney started. You came to win, my mom cut in sharply, but you lost the moment you walked away from this family. I couldn't look at Delaney, not because I felt triumphant, I didn't, but because I knew that voice. I'd been on the other side of it once, when I skipped my dad's hospital appointment to go to a college party. The shame didn't fade for weeks. Delaney folded her arms, trying to hold herself together, but she wasn't even pretending confidence anymore. I made mistakes, she whispered. No, my mother said. You made choices, and now you live with them. A long silence followed, not uncomfortable, just heavy, necessary. Then, like it had been rehearsed, my niece ran into the room and yelled, "The candles are ready." We all blinked, the tension shattered like thin glass. My mom stood, smoothing out her blouse. "Let's sing," she said, and everyone quietly followed her to the living room where the cake waited. Everyone, except Delaney. She stayed seated, alone. I stayed in the kitchen while the others moved toward the living room. The glow of candles was already flickering off the walls, and someone had started singing the birthday song in that half-committed family way where everyone forgets the key halfway through. I just needed a moment, to breathe, to let it settle. I leaned against the counter, staring at the wine glass still marked with Delaney's lipstick. That's when I heard the floor creak behind me. I didn't turn right away. I already knew it was her. She always walked with a subtle urgency, like even her footsteps wanted attention. She didn't say my name, she just stood there. I could feel her hesitation like a physical presence, this strange heat behind my back, like a ghost unsure if it wanted to haunt or apologize. "What do you want, Delaney?" I asked without turning around. She didn't answer for a few seconds, then she sighed. I didn't know she'd be here. That made me turn. She looked smaller somehow, not physically, but in energy. She wasn't trying to dominate the room anymore. She looked like someone who had finally run out of plays. "Would it have mattered?" I asked. "If Mara hadn't been here, would you still have paraded Carter through that door like a trophy?" "I wasn't parading anyone," she snapped, then winced. "Okay, maybe I was. But I didn't plan for any of this. I didn't think it would hit me like this." "Hit you?" I laughed under my breath. "You didn't think watching me survive would hurt?" Her lips parted, but there was no comeback. Just silence. And then something broke in her. "You were supposed to fight for me." That made me freeze. "Back then," she continued, eyes glossy, "when I pulled away, when I said I needed space, I wanted you to fight, to show me I mattered. Instead, you just let me go." My hands curled into fists at my sides. "You left a note, Delaney. How exactly was I supposed to fight for that?" She looked away, blinking quickly. "You didn't want me to fight," I said, quieter now. "You wanted to feel like the victim while already moving on." "No," she whispered. I didn't expect you to get better without me." That one landed. I felt it in my ribs. "You thought I'd wait," I said. "You thought you could come back whenever you were done with your experiment. I thought I'd always be your person." "Well," I said, stepping around her toward the hallway, "you were wrong." I left her there, in the kitchen, in silence. But she wasn't done. The cake was already half eaten by the time I rejoined the group. My niece had frosting on her nose. My uncle had switched to telling loud stories no one asked for. And Mara, she smiled when I sat beside her, like she knew something had shifted, not in the room, in me. Delaney never came out of the kitchen. For a while, I thought she'd just quietly leave through the back door, and that would be the last chapter of whatever tragic novel we'd co-written. But just as I was helping my mom clear the table, she stepped out, eyes red but calm. She looked at Mara, then at my mom, then, finally, at me. "Can I speak to you?" she asked. I followed her onto the porch. It was cold out, the kind of cold that silences everything except your own breath. She didn't waste time. "You were right," she said. "I wanted to be seen, but not for who I really was. Just seen. Admired, worshipped." I said nothing. Let her speak. I don't think I even loved Carter, she continued. I just liked how he looked at me. How he didn't know the worst parts of me yet. And now? I asked. She shook her head. Now I see what I gave up for that illusion. What I threw away, it wasn't just you. It was this family, these people, that dining room. I thought I could come back and everything would stay in orbit around me. She looked at me again. But you moved on. I'm still figuring that part out, I admitted. But yeah, I think I did. She gave a soft smile. And for once, it wasn't bitter or sharp. It was something almost peaceful. I don't expect forgiveness. I just didn't want to leave without saying it. Saying what? That you deserve better. And that I hope you find it. I watched her walk down the steps, her silhouette getting smaller under the porch light. And when she opened her car door, she turned back and whispered, "Take care of yourself, Owen." That was the first time she'd used my name all night. Back inside, Mara was already packing up leftovers and laughing with my mom. I slid into the scene without needing to explain anything. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like a ghost in my own life. I felt real again. Maybe healing isn't about winning. Maybe it's just about choosing not to lose yourself anymore. Thanks for watching the final part of this story on Reddit Confessions. In the comments, tell us, what's a historical moment, big or small, that changed your family forever? Subscribe for more real stories like this, and remember, sometimes the best revenge is simply moving forward.